Hi. My parents lied about my father's illness to steal $15,000 from my wedding fund and pay for their golden boy's honeymoon, so I didn't invite them to the wedding and ruined them. So I'm 26, recently married. My husband is also 26, after 6 years of dating. We had a small ceremony at his aunt's farm, which was not part of our original plans. I have always dreamed of a beach wedding because this place is associated with some of our happiest memories. My husband and I simply adore the water, and once a month we would definitely go to the coast to rest and relax. It is a special place for us, and I even started looking for hotels where our guests could stay. Like any bride on the planet, I wanted my wedding to be special, so I saved money for a grand celebration for the last 5 years. I work in advertising and earn a decent salary, but my husband and I have always lived modestly and tried to save money for the future. We planned to book one of the best hotels with a sea view so that our guests could truly enjoy the event. It was supposed to be a lavish event, but we had to change our plans and significantly cut back on our expenses because a few months ago my parents borrowed money from me and I just couldn't refuse them. To give you some context, my brother, who is 24, also recently got married, but their wedding was spontaneous and they planned almost nothing. He had been dating his wife for about 2 years and proposed to her just a month before the wedding. The ceremony was very modest, just for family and a couple of friends, but I was happy for him because it was their choice. However, a few weeks after the wedding, my mother asked me to lend her $15,000. She said that my father had suddenly fallen ill and that it was probably related to his diabetes. She claimed that she couldn't cope with all the medical bills on her own and really needed my help. She said that there was a special medicine that the doctors had prescribed, but it was very expensive because it had to be bought abroad and wasn't covered by insurance. I was very concerned about my father's health, so I decided to help her without asking any unnecessary questions. I visited my father at home several times and asked my mother to show me the medical reports, but she always skillfully avoided answering. Every time I came, my father was lying in bed, but for some reason he didn't look particularly sick. Even when I asked my mother why he had not been hospitalized for professional observation and care, she replied that there was no need. But at the same time, he was supposedly sick enough to need a rare and expensive medicine that they produce here, and that is not covered by insurance. I'm not stupid, and after the first few visits, I realized that something was wrong, but I didn't want to accuse my parents of lying until I was sure. It would have been terrible if I had accused them of lying and it turned out to be true. I noticed that my brother didn't visit our parents. When I asked why he wasn't there, my father replied that they didn't want to bother him because he was still young and needed to focus on his work. But at the same time, they didn't mind that I was worried. I spoke to my brother on the phone a couple of weeks later, and he still hadn't visited my father. He said he would visit them as soon as he returned from his honeymoon. This was news to me because I didn't even know he had gone on a trip. My parents didn't tell me about it, and he and his wife didn't post anything on social media, so I had no idea where they were. When I asked why he hadn't told me, he replied that he wanted to surprise everyone by returning in a month with lots of photos, stories, and memories from his trip around Europe. He admitted that he wasn't going to tell me, but he answered my call anyway because he was concerned after hearing what I said about my father's condition. He said he contacted my parents after my alarming message, but they assured him that everything was fine and there was nothing to worry about. According to him, my parents probably just exaggerated the situation, and I, being a little anxious, believed them, which led to the misunderstanding. I tried to give my parents a chance and convince myself that maybe they were hiding the truth from my brother, so as not to ruin his honeymoon and make him worry. Then my brother mentioned that he would be terribly embarrassed if it turned out that my father was seriously ill, because as it turned out, it was my parents who were paying for his insanely expensive and long honeymoon. All the alarm bells went off in my head, so I asked him directly how much their trip would cost. And then he said that their honeymoon would cost their parents at least $12,000 to $15,000 because he and his wife weren't going to deny themselves anything. The most expensive hotels, the best restaurants, they wanted to get the most out of this trip because it might be the only experience of its kind in their lives. Even shopping and souvenirs were paid for by my parents. I immediately realized where my money had gone and that my father had never been ill. It never happened, so they had no documents to show me, And that's why my father was never in the hospital. My parents simply made up the whole story because they wanted to use my money to pay for my brother's honeymoon. It was their wedding gift to him. It hurt me terribly to hear my brother proudly recount how my parents had gone to such lengths for him and his wife to have a wonderful time, since they hadn't had a lavish wedding. The money I had lent my parents was from my wedding fund. I felt betrayed when I realized that my parents had given it to my brother. When I spoke to them after that phone call, they admitted that they had made up the whole story because they knew that if I found out the money was going towards my brother's honeymoon, I would never have agreed to give it to them. They said he was having a hard time at work, was depressed, and they wanted him to be able to relax and not worry about anything. Unfortunately, they couldn't pay for his vacation out of their own savings because it would jeopardize their retirement fund, so they decided to borrow the money from me. Their logic was that I was still young, earned good money, and had many years ahead of me to earn that money back. But they didn't have that time. They also said that it was just money and they would pay me back in time, but now I had to think about my brother's feelings because this honeymoon had supposedly saved him from depression and restored his joy of life. I couldn't believe it because it meant I would have to organize a modest wedding for no reason. Let me clarify, I would not have minded downsizing the wedding if it was truly necessary for my father's health. However, I did not agree to my brother indulging himself with my money. I was furious when my parents told me the truth and said they had to give me the money back before I got married because I wanted to use it for my wedding. I had a lot of expenses to consider if I wanted to make my dream of a beach wedding come true. Even though my husband and his family were covering part of the costs, I still had to take care of my share. My parents never planned on paying for my wedding. They told me that many years ago. They could either pay for my college education or my wedding, but not both. I chose college and decided to pay for my wedding myself, so I saved money for several years. If any of you are wondering whether my brother was faced with the same choice when he went to college, yes, I asked him about it. He just laughed in my face as if it were the most absurd question in the world. I never brought this up with my parents because I didn't want to accuse them of having a favorite, even though it was obvious. But I was young then and dependent on them because I didn't have a job yet. Arguing with them about it was pointless. It would only make the situation worse, but the topic of favorites came up again now, several years later. My parents tried to deny it, but it was obvious. I told them they had to give me my money back because I wasn't going to give up my dream of a beach wedding just because my brother was supposedly having difficulties at work. His parents could spoil him at their expense by sending him on expensive trips, but I worked and saved money for 5 years not so that they could just take it and give it to my brother. However, they said they couldn't give me the money back right away, and that it would take them a couple of years to pay off the entire amount. They really expected me to calmly agree to this because, according to them, nothing is more important than family. If I was willing to spend that money on my father's health, then in their opinion, there was no reason why I couldn't spend it to save my brother from depression. But here's the thing. My brother would never have fallen into depression because of his job, simply because he never took it seriously. He was bad at his job and earned little because his income depended on a percentage of sales, and he didn't make an effort to succeed. If he was bad at sales, he had only himself to blame. Maybe he was a little upset about the situation, but I'm sure he would never have fallen into depression. He just didn't care. His parents had spoiled him since childhood, and he wasn't used to working for what he wanted, which is why he seemed depressed. It was all just a fabrication, but my parents blew the situation up into a tragedy to justify their decision to save my brother at my expense. It was nonsense. I tried to explain to my parents that this wedding was very important to me. I had already promised my husband and his family that I would cover certain expenses, and that would be impossible if I didn't have the money. But they said there was no way they could return the money before the wedding, and that I would have to either cut back on expenses or ask my husband and his family for help. In the end, I begged them to give me back my own money, but all they did was shake their heads and say no. They promised to return the money, but only after a few years, not sooner. I left them in tears. When I got home, I told my husband everything, and he was furious. He was even angrier and more upset than I was. He was about to contact a lawyer, but I stopped him. It didn't make sense because we had no written proof that my mother had asked for the money specifically for medical needs or that they had promised to pay it back. Everything was informal with no contracts or documents that could prove anything. Even if we had sued my parents, it would only have led to additional expenses for lawyers, and most likely we would have achieved nothing because we had no written confirmation or correspondence. Everything was said verbally, so despite our strong desire for justice, we decided to abandon the idea. It would have been pointless, and we didn't want to spend even more money on a case we knew we would lose. Instead, we started thinking about how to change our wedding plans. Fortunately, my husband's family came to our aid when they found out what my parents had done. His aunt offered to host the wedding on her farm for free. From the very beginning, we dreamed of a beach wedding, so she didn't even suggest this option at first. But now that we were looking for alternatives, she brought up the idea, and I decided to take a look at the proposed location. My husband had been there before, but when I first entered the farm, I knew right away that this was the place. The place was incredibly beautiful, and although it was far from the beach, we were fine with that. My husband's aunt allowed us to use the property completely free of charge, which was another reason to go with this option and start planning the wedding all over again. I threw myself into the wedding preparations, and this gave me another reason to finally break ties with my parents. I had already decided that my parents would not receive an invitation to the wedding, but I was unsure about my brother because he didn't know that the money his parents gave him was taken from me. However, he made my choice much easier when, after returning from his honeymoon, he called and began accusing me of humiliating our parents by demanding my money back. He said he had found out everything from our mother and was very upset that I was behaving so badly. In his opinion, it was a minor problem, despite the fact that he was the one who spent my money. He assures me that he will return it as soon as he can, but until the wedding, I should just shut up and put up with it. At that moment, I finally decided that he would not be invited either. After that, I stopped communicating with him and his parents. Now that I no longer had the entire amount from my wedding fund, I couldn't afford to have a luxurious and expensive celebration. Honestly, I think it's for the best. The wedding we ended up having was much more beautiful than I could have imagined. We had to cut back on expenses, but that was okay because over time we realized that this day should be about us. In everyday life, we are not at all the people we try to appear to be when planning an expensive wedding. It would be superficial and even ridiculous to spend a fortune just to impress others. We decided to cut back on wedding expenses and do something more meaningful with the remaining money. In a way, I am even grateful for how everything turned out. My wedding was still fabulously beautiful and magical, but without the unnecessary pomp and showiness that I had imagined at first. Only people we truly love and who sincerely love us were at our wedding. I think that's what's most important for any wedding celebration, so I'm quite happy with how everything turned out. A few days ago, I posted wedding photos on social media. I gave clear and strict instructions to all family members who were invited to the wedding so that my parents and brother would not find out about the invitations. Otherwise, they would have thrown a fit because they weren't invited. So we managed to hold the ceremony without them, and without them trying to manipulate me into inviting them to the wedding. But now that the celebration was over and had gone smoothly, I saw no harm in sharing the photos on social media. Their parents saw them and contacted me the very next day, demanding an explanation as to why they had not been invited to the wedding. I was surprised that they expected an invitation at all since our last conversation had ended far from peacefully. On the day I left my parents' house after our last conflict, I cried, and we haven't spoken since. The last conversation with my brother ended with him accusing me of dramatizing the situation and making me feel like it was all my fault. After that, I didn't communicate with him or my parents, and they didn't even try to get in touch, so I didn't understand why they expected an invitation at all. But they didn't just expect it, they were genuinely upset that they weren't invited. My parents called me, added my brother to the conversation, and all of them started yelling at me on the phone. But I didn't care anymore. I considered their behavior extremely rude and arrogant. I had already cut them out of my life and didn't want to put up with their drama when I should have been enjoying my new married life. I told them that after they stole my money, I had to significantly cut back on my wedding expenses, So I decided to invite only my closest relatives and friends. Since they didn't fall into either of those categories, they weren't on the list. After that, I hung up and blocked them, hoping they would finally leave me alone. However, an hour after that conversation, my husband told me that my brother had contacted him and said that my parents were terribly offended by what I had said. According to my brother, my mother was completely devastated, crying so hard that she almost fainted. That's all he said, but after that I started to feel guilty. I didn't want to make my parents feel that way. Maybe he was just bluffing, but I can't be sure. And since then, this strange feeling of guilt has stayed with me. Am I a bad person for not inviting my parents and brother to my wedding after they stole my wedding money? So I suggest you pause this video right now and answer the question in the comments. And now let's move on to the update. Update 1. A week has passed since that last conversation with my parents and brother, and I have decided that I will no longer communicate with them. My mother can cry all she wants, but it won't change the facts. On the day I had a falling out with them over money, I cried and even begged them to give it back to me before the wedding, but they didn't care. They took it all too lightly, so now I'm going to do the same to them. You reap what you sow. I also told my brother never to contact me or my husband again. Especially my husband, because he has nothing to do with this. I don't want my family to drag him into their petty intrigues. After that message, I blocked my brother again. They have treated me badly my whole life, but now I am no longer willing to put up with it. I swear if I had the opportunity, I would sue them and get my money back. But now that seems unlikely as we have no solid evidence. My husband thinks we should try and maybe we'll succeed. He has already consulted with an experienced lawyer, and in a couple of days we will decide what to do next. In the meantime, I need to figure out how to get my parents to admit that they took my money under the pretext of my father's illness and then gave it to my brother so that he could enjoy his honeymoon in peace. It will be difficult to prove in court, but I'm not going to give up so easily. I want my money back, and I will do whatever it takes to get it back as soon as possible. Yesterday, I told my brother to stop bothering my husband with our family drama. Apparently, he took that as a signal to do the opposite and decided to drag him in even deeper, even though this drama has nothing to do with him. After work, my husband told me that his parents and brother had bombarded him with messages, demanding that he talk to me and convince me to unblock them. When he blocked them, they took it to a new level and just showed up at his work. They waited for him outside the building, and as soon as they saw him leaving in his car, they started. He pursued them without stopping. He had to pull over and wait because he immediately recognized his brother's car and realized it was them. He also understood that if they didn't stop, they would just follow him home, which would upset me even more, so he decided to deal with them right there and then. When my husband stopped, my brother got out of the car, walked up to the window, and said they wanted to talk in person. There was a diner nearby, and my husband just wanted to get it over with as quickly as possible. They sat down at a table, and my family began their impassioned speech. My brother said that he didn't think it was fair that I cut them out of my life because of some money and that I was clearly going too far. In his opinion, the fact that I implied we were no longer a family just because they borrowed money from me was too much. They knew I had blocked them and that they couldn't reach me directly. But they figured that if my husband talked to me, I might listen to him. They tried to pressure him to remind me that family is the most important thing, and that I should stop freaking out over a minor misunderstanding. My parents also said they would definitely pay me back, but they just couldn't do it right now. They claimed that they had already explained this to me a million times, and that I should be more understanding because my brother was having difficulties at work and my parents were about to retire. They tried to convince my husband that it was all my fault and that I was being unreasonable. But my husband handled the situation brilliantly. Instead of putting them in their place, he started playing along with them, as if he were on their side. He said he would try to explain their position to me, but that it would be much more effective if they contacted me themselves and sent me a sincere, emotional message. Until that moment, they had only communicated with me in an accusatory tone. My husband convinced them that if they admitted their mistakes, it might calm me down and make me more lenient. Those idiots fell for it. My husband manipulated them into agreeing to send me a message admitting everything they had done sincerely believing that it would make me back down and even apologize to them. Of course, this is complete nonsense. As soon as they send this message, we will use it as a written confession of guilt and take them to court. I am incredibly proud of my husband because he handled this situation much better than I could have. I think he's a real evil genius, but he's my evil genius. I adore him. Update 3. My husband's plan worked and we are thrilled. My parents and brother, like complete idiots, sent me an email detailing every lie they told me and basically admitting to everything they did. Now that we have evidence, my husband has given our lawyer the green light to file a lawsuit, and very soon we will get our money back. $15,000 may not be a large sum to some people, but it means a lot to me. I have been saving it for the last 5 years, planning for my future. I worked hard to achieve what I have now. It cost me many sleepless nights and personal sacrifices, and I will not let it all go to waste just because my brother is lazy and my parents continue to indulge him. That is why we are suing them, and whatever it takes, we will get my money back. We have also started planning our honeymoon. We decided that it will be a short trip to the beach, the very place where our relationship began, and which will always be special to us. Maybe in a few months we will take a full vacation, but for now, this is the best we can afford. We realize that we don't need to impress anyone or spend a lot of money. We can just do what makes us happy, and that's what we do. And no, I'm not going to behave like my brother who posted dozens of photos from his honeymoon on social media, as if he wanted to show off to everyone. But now he's facing a lawsuit. Irony of fate. Of course, I feel sorry for them, but they brought it on themselves and now they'll get what they deserve. Well, that's all. Be sure to write in the comments what you think about this whole story. Honestly, despite all the details that have been revealed, I think that suing your parents is a bit too much. I wonder if a similar situation happened in your family, would you do the same? Be sure to write your thoughts in the comments. Because, of course, it's easy to say, yes, of course I would do that. But when it comes to your own parents, it's completely different. Anyway, thank you for watching this video to the end. Check out our previous video, which you can find here, and good luck.